Well, I think we have all heard so many times before, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But I kind of have a weird feeling that the SEC is going to try to fix something that isn't just not broken, but is actually working really, really well, for LSU at least. We'll break into that plus more on this edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, whatever that might be. You can find us there. You can also find us on YouTube as well. You can do it on your TV. You can watch it on your smartphone. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so you get notified as soon as the podcast drop. I know you do not want to miss a single second of your LSU content. And once you subscribe, you won't. But I'm Caroline Fenton, and I'm your host. I am an LSU graduate, and I now host Sports Talk Radio for ESPN 1025 The Game in Nashville, Tennessee. Diehard LSU fans, you can follow me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. And of course, you can find us on Twitter at Locked On LSU, and of course on YouTube at Locked On LSU as well. Now, the SEC has considered a schedule change, and Greg Sankey spoke with The Athletic not too long ago about exactly what a potential SEC schedule change may look like. Now, I want to preface this by saying nothing is official, nothing is set in stone, there has not been pen to paper. All it simply is discussions about what a potentially modified SEC schedule may look like. Now, the first thing that was brought up, I'll just walk y'all through exactly what Greg Sankey was talking about, exactly what the SEC kind of deliberated on, give you my thoughts on it. So first and foremost, they proposed a 9-game SEC schedule. So the SEC, according to Greg Sankey, one thing that they did not want to ever do was go beyond 8 in-conference games. Of course, that's the model that exists now. You have 6 games within your division. So for LSU, that would be those 6 games in the SEC West. And then there are 2 out-of-division games. So for the LSU, that would be Florida permanently, and then that rotating SEC East game. For this year, it's Tennessee. But there was they didn't want to go beyond 8 games because there was a little bit of hesitancy about exactly what a 9-conference game schedule, the implications that could have on bowl eligibility. So, of course, you need to have at least 6 wins to make a bowl. Of course, there's been like those weird exceptions, like Hawaii got into a bowl. They had 5 games. It was kind of a weird situation, but blanket statement, for the most part, you have to win 6 games in order to be bowl eligible. So you have 8 conference games, and those 4 either cupcake games thrown in there or some of those out-of-conference matchups, LSU, UCLA this past year, for example, LSU, Wisconsin a few years ago, that aren't necessarily cupcake games, but they're out-of-conference games. And this year, LSU has those games, the in-state matchups, Southeastern, for example, ULL, for example. I digress. But a lot of not as powerful football schools rely on kind of those 4 cupcakes and then a couple conference games thrown in there. But eliminating one of those easier games on your schedule makes it much more difficult to be bowl eligible. And of course, the SEC wants as many teams to be bowl eligible as possible. It's good for money. It's good for business. It's good exposure. It's good experience. Overall, it's good for the conference whenever there are more teams in bowls. So that was something that is on the table that previously has been a 9-game schedule. Why is that exactly? Greg Sankey explained it because not enough teams play other teams or out of division teams enough. He cited the fact that Georgia and A&M have only played once since A&M has joined the SEC. Georgia has yet to visit College Station. Texas A&M joined the SEC 10 years ago, and they have only played once. So it's getting into this, and they're not on the schedule this year either. So you're talking 11 years. In Georgia and A&M have only played once. And if you're going to talk about in-conference kind of camaraderie, and if you want to talk about having a truly partial schedule, then teams need to play each other more than once every 10, 11 years. And I agree with that. Greg Sankey said this once in every 12-year approach, 11, 10, whatever that might be, we would have turned the page on that whether we expanded or not. So that's the other kicker here, is we can talk all day long about this 9-game schedule, what that might mean for the currently constructed SEC, but in just a few short years, all of that is going to be completely blown up once Texas and Oklahoma join the conference. Now, once the SEC expands from 14 to 16 teams, a 9-game in-conference schedule only makes more sense because the way it's currently constructed with 2 fewer teams than they will have in the next few years, teams already don't play each other enough. Add 2 teams in the mix, Georgia and A&M are never going to see each other. So a 9-game schedule, even pre and post expansion to Texas and Oklahoma, really only makes sense. I'm fully on board for it. I would love to play Georgia and Tennessee and Kentucky and these teams other than Florida in the East. I would love to play them more. But I'll go on to exactly what that looks like whenever Texas and Oklahoma do join the SEC. Now, what is that makeup going to look like? We've heard so many possible ideas thrown out there, which of course are not set in stone. They're just ideas. Now, pods are one of those things that has kind of been thrown out there. So 4-team pods, a 16-team conference, 14 pods, just for scheduling purposes. So it would be kind of this 3-6 arrangement where you would be in your pod of 4 teams. You would play those 3 teams every year, and then you would rotate 6 games yearly, which, going from rotating 2 games to rotating 6 games would give you the opportunity to play not just other teams in other pods, but the teams that in the traditional setup now you don't play a lot either. Greg Sankey goes on to say, we still have some time based on a July 1st, 2025 entry date. Asterisk, I think it's going to be earlier than that. That's based on nothing but just my own observations and opinions, but I'll continue. But it says it's been a really healthy opportunity to look at, well, how do we keep things fresh and new by moving teams through? Whether it's divisions, single divisions, we'll keep pods alive for the conversation purposes today, but it's a really interesting conversation. And I think it's really interesting as well, because what is the setup going to be? Is it going to be by geography? Are you going to try and maintain as many classic rivalries as possible? It's really difficult to do that when you're only going to have a 14 pod versus a 7-team division. I know LSU has way more than 3 historical rivalries and even new rivalries now, if we want to call Texas A&M a rivalry. So you can't really maintain that in the pod structure. The other option would be rearranging divisions to 8-team divisions. What exactly would that look like? Geographically, it only makes sense for Texas and Oklahoma to join the West. I mean, the way that it exists now, geographically, the SEC doesn't really make sense. I mean, Missouri being in the SEC East, with it being the furthest West school in the SEC, doesn't make sense. But it really doesn't make sense to put Texas in the East, and then you got people in South Carolina traveling to Austin, Texas. That's not a short trip, and that's not sustainable if that's going to be a yearly match. So Texas and Oklahoma really only make sense for them to join the West. So that would mean, and in several proposed models, and geographically speaking, Alabama and Auburn would shift to the East, Missouri would come to the West. So the West would be how it's currently constructed, except Alabama and Auburn to the East, bring in Missouri and bring in Texas and Oklahoma. So that's a really interesting proposal. Now, the goal is to come out of the SEC meetings at the end of June with a plan. What will not just 2022 and 2023, but also 2025 or whenever Texas and Oklahoma do join the SEC, what does that look like? At least we can have a plan or an idea of exactly what the divisions or the pods or what the SEC setup will look like. We'll table the pods for now. What would those rearranged divisions look like? And what exactly does that mean, not just for the SEC, but for LSU? I want to get into that coming up next. Before we do that, I want to tell y'all about Built Bar, because I love brownies. I mean, who doesn't love brownies? But what I love more is, whenever you make brownies and you stick your spatula or your mixer or whatever that might be in the batter and you lick it right off the spatula or whatever that might be. I mean, sometimes the batter is even better than the brownies themselves. But what's even better than that is if it's healthy. And that's where Built Bar comes in. Built Bar has a new creation, and this one is better than ever, the Brownie Batter Puff. The puff is a protein-infused marshmallow, and this takes protein bars to a whole another level. And the good news is you can get them at Built.com right now. The Built Puffs are absolutely delicious. I had a birthday cake puff for breakfast this morning, actually. I had so many meetings today. I was on the go, just slipped one in my purse, got my sweet fix, got my protein fix for the day, and it got me all throughout the day. And I'm not really sure what you're waiting for if you haven't tried them yet, because they're chocolate-covered marshmallows, and they have protein. Only 140 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 7 grams of sugar. I mean, the Brownie Batter Puffs are the perfect pick-me-up for any day, whether you want to start your day with it or if it's going to be, your 2 p.m. pick-me-up. I know that's whenever I start to crash a little bit. But they're made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently, and it has a ton of health benefits. I know I've taken collagen supplements before to make my hair grow, make my nails grow, make my skin healthy, and Built Bar has all of that good stuff packed right into it. The Brownie Batter Puffs will have you completely forgetting that you're even eating a protein bar, which is kind of the best part about eating healthy, is when it doesn't taste like you're eating healthy. So go to Built.com to get Brownie Batter Puffs right now. Go to Built.com and use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. But like I mentioned, the SEC exploring new ways that the divisions can be divvied up once Texas and Oklahoma join the mix. Now, one of the proposals was 2 8-team divisions. That would mean that Alabama and Auburn leave the SEC West, Texas and Oklahoma and Missouri come in. Leaves them with 8 teams. My biggest question as far as LSU is concerned is, what does that mean for the future of LSU's rivalries? I mean, I think that we can all argue Alabama, of course, obviously, is a rivalry. Florida is a rivalry, and that's already their permanent SEC East game. Auburn's a rivalry. Ole Miss is a rivalry. Of course, Ole Miss would stay in the West. But whenever Alabama leaves the SEC West and goes to the East, that now leaves LSU's arguably 2 biggest rivals in the SEC East. I don't know about y'all, but when I think about college football, LSU and Alabama is what I think of. The hatred, just the animosity and the pure, just utter hate that I know at least I have for Florida, and you probably do too. That's what I think of when I think of college football, when I think of SEC rivalries, when I think about games that we go back so long. It's rivalries that have existed as long as these college football teams have existed as well. I mean, Alabama and LSU go hand in hand when you talk about the SEC West. When you talk about the heaviest hitters in the SEC and the SEC West, you talk about Alabama and LSU. You talk about that hatred. When you talk about the rivalry of LSU and Alabama, you kind of talk about the outcome of the SEC West itself. Of course, not the past couple of years, but historically, yes. So I think that's my bid for Greg Sankey, for the SEC, and for the future of how these divisions will be divvied up, is what's the plan to maintain rivalries? Because I don't see a world in which Alabama and LSU and Florida and LSU don't play every year. Moving Alabama to the East with Auburn, that would leave out, because I think there are a few rivalries that they want to maintain. Alabama and Auburn, obviously, that's the Iron Bowl. Alabama and Tennessee, that's another rivalry that goes back just as far as Alabama and LSU. Talk about hatred. There's a lot of hatred there. Alabama moving to the East with Auburn would maintain those rivalries within the division, and it would leave Alabama's only rotating, in this new structure would be LSU, or unless you want to throw Ole Miss in there. Alabama Ole Miss would no longer be a rivalry in this current structure. Florida LSU would no longer exist if they're only going to have one permanent out of division game. I don't see a world in which all of LSU's rivals can be maintained. And I don't like that. I don't like that for so many reasons. I mean, I'm one of those people that just absolutely disdains change. So maybe that's a little bit of that coming through. Or maybe it's a little bit of, I feel like we've had so many changes in college football over the past couple of years. NIL, which at the end of the day, I do believe is a positive change, but it's changed nonetheless. The college football playoff, just the structure of college football in general, so much has changed. COVID, so much has changed over the past few years. I want to hold on to those things that have kind of felt like constants. You can have NIL, you can have a college football playoff, you can change everything, you can change nothing, but what will remain is Alabama and LSU, is Auburn and LSU, is Florida and LSU. It's kind of that constant that, at least for me, I always know is always going to be there. And it's a reason why I love college football, because the whole world can change, but college football stays the same. And I don't want to see those things go. Unfortunately, I do think that they will go. But I that's my question for the SEC is, what is their commitment to maintaining some of those rivalries? What is their commitment to making sure, or to kind of change the structure? If they're going to change the divisions, are they going to change the way that, SEC East and SEC West teams play each other? Are you going to have two permanent out of division games? Well, that doesn't necessarily align with Greg Sankey's kind of wish to play more teams more often. Then what's the other option? You don't play Alabama, or you don't play Florida every year. And I just don't like that. And I do not like it whatsoever. The pod structure, I think, is interesting. I've seen a few proposed pods, out there on the internet. It would be LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. I've seen, LSU, Alabama, Auburn, Ole Miss in a pod, which would be kind of gunfight of a pod. I've seen a bunch of things, all, on articles and Twitter, whatever that might be. Kind of like the idea of pods. It completely obliterates our total understanding of the SEC. I think of it as so binary, as the West and the East. The pods would really switch things up. And as I just said, I hate change. I think that would be kind of a fun change that I would really like to see. And it would kind of be a little bit more of a shakeup. But they have those games rooted in the pods, the few games that we just feel like are non-negotiables. At least in my mind, I feel like they are non-negotiables. And Alabama and LSU is just one of those things that is a non-negotiable for me, that I really hope the SEC is not trying to fix something that's not broken. But coming up next, we'll talk about the schedules of the future. Let's talk about the schedule of now and exactly what the grand scheme of college football looks like and where LSU fits in there. I want to talk about the preseason top 25 coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Rock Auto. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's almost impossible to go to your local chain auto parts store and that have all of the parts that you need, and you get in and get out quickly. Oftentimes, you ask all of these questions that they don't have the answers to, or they ask you questions that you don't have the answer to. Like, what kind of oil does your car need? I don't know. I'm not a mechanic. And I don't want to wait there while they have to order the parts that I need, or wait for them to get all those parts in. I want to get in and get out and make it easy. And it isn't always easy at an auto parts store, but it is easy when you have it on your computer and in your pocket, and you have that with rockauto.com. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. You could spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more the same parts from a chain art store or a car dealership. For example, I need to get the brakes redone on my car. I went to a local auto parts store. They gave me a price. At Rock Auto, it was almost half of that. So it will save you a ton of money, and I can attest to that. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right? Locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Now make sure to go check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look at the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, the big boards. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So I had one person ask me for my mailbag last week, which we will be doing tomorrow. So if you have a question for me, make sure to send those in. You can send them in on Twitter at CarolineFenton1 or at Locked on LSU. Make sure to get those questions in for our mailbag tomorrow. But I got this question about how I forget the exact wording. So to the person who asked the question, I apologize if I butcher your question, but the question was essentially, how concerned are you that LSU isn't in the preseason top 25? And I said, I'm not concerned about it whatsoever. There are so many question marks about what this team will look like. I was even talking to my boss this morning. We were talking about the LSU Tennessee game, and he was saying, I don't know what either of those teams are going to look like. He said LSU is one of those teams that their over-under is 7 wins, and I really have no idea what I'm going to do with that. So I think everyone is just a little bit confused about exactly how to categorize LSU. So I'm not going to take that personally, that they're not going to be placed into the top 25. But the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I thought, should I be concerned? Should people buy in more into the Brian Kelly era? Should people be more excited about the roster that's been built, the players they were able to get into the transfer portal, their recruiting class, which is one of the top in college football? I thought, is LSU being underestimated? So I did a little bit of research, and I wanted to compare last year, the preseason top 25 versus the postseason top 25. And I used the AP for both just to keep a little bit of consistency here, just to see, one, how accurate are these top 25s? And two, not just how accurate are they, but how can we project that onto this year? So I did a little bit of comparing. One team that was left out of the preseason top 25 was Michigan. Michigan was postseason top 25 number 3. Michigan went to the college football playoff. They're the third ranked team after the regular season. Michigan wasn't even in the preseason top 25. Baylor, not in the preseason top 25, finished the season 5th and won the Big 12 Conference Championship. Oklahoma State, not listed in the preseason top 25, finished the season 7th and actually lost to Baylor in that Big 12 Conference Championship. Michigan State, not in the preseason top 25. And another team that was incredibly fun to watch this past year. I mean, the things that Mel Tucker has done to that program was very impressive. Michigan State finished the season 9th in the postseason top 25. Utah, not in preseason top 25, 12th postseason top 25. Pitt, missing MIA in the preseason top 25. They finished the season 13th with a Heisman Trophy finalist, and their quarterback went in the first round of the NFL draft. Wake Forest, not listed, preseason top 25, finished the season 15th. Houston, not listed in the preseason top 25. They finished the season 17th. And it goes on and on from there. NC State, San Diego State. Really, I mean, the majority of the second half of the postseason top 25 wasn't in the preseason top 25. So it just confirms how I responded to that question last week. It means nothing. You shouldn't be worried about it, and you should not be scouring the internet to find a preseason top 25 that doesn't list LSU. And you should not be upset that there is not or may not be a preseason top 25 that doesn't have LSU on the list. Because when you think about it, this is a new coaching staff. Nobody outside of Baton Rouge really knows what to expect. And even the people in Baton Rouge and all of you LSU fans, I don't know what to expect. You don't know what to expect. So how do we expect national college football writers to be able to give LSU the benefit of the doubt for that? We don't know who is going to be the quarterback of this team. So how can they project how good LSU will be when we don't even know who will be under center? I mean, I think that drastically changes the way this team will look, the way this offense will look, and I think the way that nationally LSU is perceived. They have a lot of young players. There are a lot of position groups that aren't very deep. They have a lot of players coming in from the transfer portal that we don't know how will work together. There are so many question marks surrounding this team. I don't blame people in the national media for not putting LSU in the top 25 when there are a lot of other college football programs that are a lot easier to project what they will do. And in the end, like we saw last season, you can't really project much. Michigan went to the college football playoff and preseason wasn't even listed in the top 25. I don't want to discredit national college football writers because they're wonderful. And I don't want to discredit anyone who makes these lists, but their guess is as good as my guess, is as good as your guess, is as good as anyone else's guess about exactly what this college football season will look like. We can take as many clues as we can from last year. We can assume that the teams that were good last year could maybe be good this year, but maybe not. We really have no idea. So to you, if you're an LSU fan who's bummed about the lack of preseason hype nationally for LSU in this season, I say calm it down. I'm not going to say LSU is going to the college football playoff, but also it happened to Michigan. Baylor won their conference championship. Oklahoma State went to the conference championship. Michigan State was one of the more exciting teams to watch in college football. Pitt had a Heisman Trophy finalist. It's hard to project those things sometimes. I don't think I projected those things to happen. I don't think anyone projected Michigan to beat Ohio State and to have the kind of season that they had. But they did. That's one of the best parts about college football is you have no freaking clue, and I have no freaking clue what's going to happen. Maybe LSU doesn't finish the season top 25. It's kind of my expectation that they will. I mean, every team in the top 25 last year had 9 wins or better, and I think there was only 1 or 2 teams that only had 9 wins. It was a majority 10, 11, 12-win teams. So college football is really freaking competitive. I would love LSU to finish top 25. I would love for the national college football writers to be giving LSU a lot of preseason hype. But that's not what matters. The only thing that matters, all of those preseason top 25, once that ball is kicked off in New Orleans against Florida State, none of that matters. All that matters is what happens on the field. So don't hang your head low. We'll be just fine. That is going to do it for me today. I thank you so much for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Now, coming up tomorrow, we will have a little bit of a preview of that game. We got some specifics of the Florida State game, exactly what's going to go down. I want to break that down as well as your questions. Make sure to get your questions in. You can DM them or tweet me at Caroline Fenton1 or Locked On LSU. And make your second listen Locked On SEC. You can get all of your daily SEC news in less than 30 minutes with SEC expert Chris Gordy. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts.